In rehearsal, I think we should be focusing on listening to the ensemble, evaluating what's going on, and also monitoring ourselves. Are we doing the right thing for the moment? And this sounds a lot. I guarantee you it's overwhelming. Hello. Welcome back to the Conductors podcast. I'm so thrilled to welcome you back and happy end of July. Today's episode is the last one of the Conductors podcast summer mini-series. If you've been listening, you know that during this month of July, we are taking a break from the usual interview episode. Instead, I've been sharing my thoughts and some tips and what I think about the different aspects of the conducting profession, which is something that's not immediately associated with conducting. You know, when people think about studying conducting, we think about waving our arms. But last week, we spoke about speaking to the audience. And at the beginning of the month, I talked about my process of programming and also prepping for rehearsals. So those were the things that is actually sometimes more important than waving your arms in front of the ensemble in the business and also in your study. In today's episode, I will be talking about how can I get better? That's a question that I got a lot from young conductors, especially. But I think conducting is such an amazing profession to me because we can always continue to improve ourselves. We can always get better at understanding a certain composer, understanding a certain style, understand how to work with different kinds of ensembles because the industry is changing. Each ensemble is different. Even if you conduct the same orchestra or the same choir for a while, they will respond differently from day to day, depending on what's going on in their lives, what's going on in your season, not to mention the pandemic. So I got this question a lot from young conductors. How do I get better? How do I practice? What can I work, especially if I don't have an ensemble that I'm constantly working with? So in today's episode, I will be talking about 4 things. I will be sharing with my ideas and tips of how to improve conducting techniques or gestures. That's 1. And second, how to have a better and deeper understanding of the score study practice. And number 3, how to work on rehearsal techniques on your own. And lastly, I'll be touching on how to create your own ensemble. So let's dive in. So the first thing we are going to talk about is conducting techniques. And conducting techniques are not only about waving your arms, because even though that is important, there are some other things also important, including your eye contact, your posture and your presence, how you stand there, how you talk to your ensembles. You know, there was one time a musician told me that they judge the conductor by the way they walk into the rehearsal. So the 5 or 10 seconds when you enter the room and get to the podium, they already have an opinion on you, and they decided if you're there going to listen to you or not. That is very judgmental. I was totally shocked, but I could see their point. You know, for someone playing professionally for over a decade or 20 years or 25, 30 years, they've played for hundreds of conductors. They've learned how to react to a new conductor very quickly. And I'm not telling you this just to scare you, but know that from how you smile if you greet the musicians and how you're walking, if you're confident, if you're nervous, if you walk really fast or if you walk, confidently, leisurely, they all affect and it's part of your conducting. But we are going to first quickly talk about how I learned or practiced having better eye contact and better posture. And then I'll be focusing our talk today about conducting techniques. So waving your arms. So first, eye contact. I have friends who say it's a gender thing, that she had coached female students who are less confident, which is shown by them not wanting to make eye contact. I also have another colleague telling me that she felt it's an experience thing because she had coached young conducting students who are so shy or so confident that they don't want to look at the musicians. No matter what, it's perceived as not being confident. And conducting is a lot about perceptions. It has nothing to do with how you think you're doing. It's everything about how others think you're doing. So if you're doing a gesture, you think it's being lyrical when people interpret it as being lousy or like being lazy, then you are going to be viewed as a lazy conductor, right? Eye contact. If you are not sure who to look, I always look at the forehead of the person at the very back of the session. You don't want to only look at people in front of you, right in front of you. You want to take care of people at the very back as always. So you want to look up to the tallest person in your bass section that's standing at the top of the riser. You want to look to the back of the second violin sessions. You want to look very, very far ahead to your trombones, so on and so on. So either find the forehead of a person there and you kind of look around, or you try to look to a group of people, whatever that is less intimidating for you. To start there, at times, you'll be able to look into people's eyes more often. Now, posture. I am a terrible person when it comes to posture. I move around a lot. I jump around, and I was always ashamed because all my teachers would tell me that if I can't stand still, I was basically useless in conducting. Even Maestro Heiting said if people look up and can't find you, they don't want to look for you anymore. They just ignore you, which I agree. But my teacher at Eastman, Neil Verone, really released that self-guilt out of me. He said he would always say, I'm the number one jumper at Juilliard. I jump around, and that you're moving around because you are engaging and you have energy that you want to release, which is a good thing. We just need to learn to redirect your energy. So I really found what he was saying like really useful to like mentally to understand that I'm not such a terrible person just because I can't stand still, but having a good posture is important because that's something that your musicians get from you kind of unconsciously. They only look at you, glance at you, and you're always slouching, always spinning to your ensemble, always leaning forward. It creates a different kind of feeling atmosphere. It's not as welcoming and opening up. This is something that I would say a little bit more in the third section when we talk about rehearsal techniques, that pay attention to those things when you can in rehearsal, when you're conducting, when the music is less complicated, when you can focus a little bit on yourself. Just remind yourself to stand up, to be tall. And at times, it will get better. I promise you. And just have your shoulders backward, like kind of open up your shoulder. And that's all I'm going to say here. Now, conducting techniques. Conducting techniques is a complicated thing, right? But to start working on your own conducting techniques, you need to know what you have to work on. And that I always suggest people to watch yourself conducting silently to see if you can figure out what you're doing. If you're conducting quietly or intensively, what instruments are you conducting? Is it a treble voice? Is it a bass voice? Is this something lyrical? Or is it something heroic? Is it something intense? Is it something rhythmic? Are you really being rhythmically correct? Are you dragging the ensemble? Like really watch yourself and make a list of things that you should be working on. If you notice, like I learned this from watching myself, that when there is a meter change, I'm always waiting slightly at the end of the last beat, making me a little slightly behind the downbeat. And that's causing some confusion to my ensemble. And I didn't realize that. I thought they were just not paying attention or they're not playing together. When later I found out it's actually my fault and they were doing it because they were trying to follow me. So make a list of things that you should be working on. I'll say, I conduct all the same size. then do some exercise or mark in your score there are places where you can conduct a little smaller. If you realize that you're always conducting vertically, or you are having this, like my teacher would describe like a jerking gesture of like boom, boom, boom at the end of the beat, then you want to start practicing a more lyrical or more horizontal, flat kind of motion. So really know what you need to work on by watching yourself. Do a self-evaluation and know what is not going great. And I would suggest not to watch great conductors with world famous ensembles if you want to improve yourself, because a lot of times we are only looking at the surface value of what they're doing, right? I remember when I was just starting, we would talk to my friends and say, like the famous so-and-so didn't really conduct that well, and I couldn't understand their beat. But when I got older and more experienced, I realized it could be a lot of things were done already in rehearsal, or the musicians that you're working with are needing a different kind of messages or different kind of help from the conductor. They might be just letting them play and influence the sound at times, or there are things that can be captured from the video. There are some other things that's happening on the spot that you're not seeing. But sometimes we equate that with good conducting. Say, they are not giving the clear thing, so I'll be okay if I do the same. No, don't do that. While I will actually encourage people to watch conducting competitions, not to say, this person got in and won the competition, but they were actually bad. No, but conducting competition is a good way and an interesting way to think about a variety of ways to conduct. Like in competitions, they have to conduct the same excerpts, the same pieces. So you can see kind of gesture-wise, it's like having a gesture toolbox or a palette of things that you can choose from, just kind of broadening and expanding your imagination of, I always conduct this part this way. Maybe I could do that way, and it could be also useful or helpful, or it's a different kind of musical interpretation. And also watching conductors known for having good techniques is also helpful. But, just like for those kind of videos, they are not always focusing on the conductors, but things like that would be really useful. And I also use videos to practice getting used to delayed sound. So in the orchestral world, especially mostly in European orchestras, they play behind the beat. So I would really practice beating through a piece ahead of the ensemble, preferably with a conductor who is also ahead of the ensemble. So to get used to how the sound is in relation with my beat. So maybe I'm already going to the second beat and the first beat is just happening, like playing an organ. That after you press the key, it takes a split second for the sound to come out, but you can't wait. You have to keep playing and just get used to the sound keeps happening, but just a little bit behind. So that's something that I did for quite a while, especially in preparation. If I'm going to Europe to work with a European orchestra, I want to make sure that I'm not caught off guard, because that did happen once to me and it didn't end well. It didn't end pretty. It was bad. So those are some things that I've used that help me getting better conducting techniques. And as always, if you can afford, finding a good conducting teacher is key. That's something a little more different. And as the episodes that Talia, Ilan, and I talked about how to find the right teacher, I will put that in the link as well. She offered some tips of really, really finding someone that will be able to help you. Next, we'll be talking about score study. And I would like to invite you to listen to episode number 33, or the April edition of the Conductors Podcast Wisdom Series, if you haven't already. Because in that particular episode, I asked 10 friends how they study their scores. And that's why that's been the Wisdom Series. But there are a lot of goodies in there. Studying score was my biggest question when I was first learning conducting. because I had conducting experience. In my high school, I used to be the student conductor for my high school choir and the string orchestra. So I knew a little bit about how to wave my arms, and I've been playing an ensemble since I was little. So I know how rehearsals generally go, but I never had to really study a score. I kind of was leading from the violin parts because I was a violinist. So I'm so used to already knowing the melody and just go from there. And it would be okay for my high school string ensemble because that's kind of all we needed, right? So if I could get the tempo right, get the transitions right, then take care of the melody, everybody would think that the student was doing a pretty good job. But now, having to work more professionally in the master's program, having to learn the full score of an orchestral work and learn all the transposition and all the swing part was really new to me. So I asked this question to a lot of people, people I met at workshops or people I thought they were better conductors than I did. I wanted to share some of the tips that was given to me. One of them was to use piano reduction to learn the harmony and learn the structure. That was given to me by a friend, Tara. She was a really, really good conductor. So I actually bought all the piano reductions of all Beethoven symphonies to study them. And it worked for a little bit, but not for long, personally. But I know there are still people doing that, especially for operatic repertoire or for some other things. It could be really, really useful to start from the piano reduction because it gives you the bare bone of what this music essentially is about. Also, if you are learning repertoire from the earlier period, Beethoven composed from the piano. A lot of them had the piano reduction first. Even Strauss, when he was writing the very, very complicated opera like Salome, he started with a piano reduction and then he indicated this melody being played by flute, that is for oboe, that is for cello or bass, and his piano score. And then he orchestrated. So I think this is a really good way if you have some piano proficiency that you can play some lines on the piano, or even if you can't, it's probably less overwhelming for anyone to look at just two lines, or sometimes if it's a complicated, La Pomedi, the prelude to the Afternoon of the Fauns. I know there are 3 lines because of the harp melodies. It's still less overwhelming than having to read 20 lines at the same time, right? I remember when I studied with my first private teacher, more than 20 years ago on conducting, I asked her, all right, so which line are you following when you conduct? She said, all of them. I said, what? It can't possibly be all of them because physically your eyes can't look at 20 lines together. She said, yeah, you can after some practice. So then she asked me, what was I following? I say first violin. I'm a violinist. I'm so used to saying that line. So she laughed and told me, you know what? It's okay to follow the first violin line since they very much have the most important thing, especially for classical period. But once you're able, start adding the cello line. And I thought that was an interesting idea. So that's the second tip that I'm going to tell you. So the first one being using the piano reduction to learn the harmony and structure of the piece. And the second one is follow the melody and bass line. That sounds so simple, right? But think about who is your treble voice, who is your bass voice. And then in between, then you start to see a pattern that composers use. Some people like to group all treble instruments together. So flute, oboe will be doubling violins, and the oboe, bassoons, no, not oboes, bassoons and maybe horns doubling the cello and bass. Or some people like to group strings together, winds together. Some people like in wind ensemble literature, there would be, sometimes the clarinet, saxophone together with maybe horns, and then with the more pointing instruments, oboe, bassoons, and maybe trumpets together. Or they can be the heavy bass parts with trombones, euphonium, and tuba, and bass drums all together. So you start to see some pattern of how composers design their treble and bass line. So find your melody and find your bass line and start to add instrument entrances would be really good start. The third thing that I think is to have a set of steps that you go through when you study scores. Because, there are so many things that you can study about the score. You can learn about the harmony, you can learn about the phrases, you can learn about the overall formal structure, you can learn about the instrumentation, you can learn about the grouping, and you can learn about the meter, the tempo changes, transitions. So when you have a set of steps that you go through, it's less likely that you miss something. And I talk about that, I think, briefly in the episode number 33 with the wisdom series, but I'm going to talk a little more about score study in one of the future episodes. But I do have a very, very strict ratio that I go through that I learned from my teacher at CCM, Mark Gibson. The first thing I always do is to write down my name. That sounds very silly, but I do it kind of religiously. Whenever I get this new score, I write down my name and I date it, so knowing when I got the score. And the next thing is I go through every single page and write down measure numbers. If there is already a measure number, I write them bigger again. I don't write down the measure number for each individual single measure. I like some of the wing band pieces. I know I have conductor friends, and also I actually have a musician in my ensemble who did that. It's a trumpet player who was writing the measure number of every single measure. I don't do that, but I do write the measure number at the beginning and the end of each system. And I go through the entire piece once. And then I mark all the tempo changes and key changes. I mark them in red. And then I mark through any of the instruments changes. So, piccolo changing into flute, oboe changing into English horn, the horns goes from an F into an E, in A, where trumpet goes here and there. Where does my trombone play the first time? Is it in measure 158 or is it in measure 35? Does my tuba only play 5 measures in this movement? Who doesn't play in each movement? I write that down. And then I start with phrasal analysis. That's usually when I first listen to a piece. I'll listen through it and I mark some of the phrasing. Okay, this is apparently a 3-bar phrase. There's a pivotal phrase ending here, but dovetailed by the next phrase and things like that. So I will listen and kind of marking things. And then I don't listen anymore. I sit down and just mark every single phrase to the point when I can. And then I mark the big sections. Okay, here is the development. Here is the reprise. Here's the introduction. The introduction comes back again in the later session. So I have a set of things that I always go through when I have time. And then I know that I'm not missing anything critical. So that's my suggestion number 3. And yep. And then I will be asking my friends about how they mark their score. That's another story, but I wanted just to say briefly. I do mark my score because I have friends who don't, and I mark scores sometimes heavily for especially pops concert or for things that I have to get through very quickly. Sometimes I have to learn a huge repertoire in just one night, then I mark them heavily. So I think marking scores is to serve 2 purposes. One is to help you study, and second is to help you visually when you are in rehearsal. When you look down, there's something that you need to see that is there. So think about this. There are things that you might mark or not that helps you study to internalize the music. And depending on what kind of person you are, you might be someone who like to look down and see the horn entrance is coming in 4 more bars. Or you might be someone liking to see, okay, very soon there is a meter change of 5/7, 5/4, 5/6. So do what you need for yourself. Those are some tips that was given to me and something that had worked for me about score study. The next, I would like to talk about rehearsal techniques. And this is something that is a little tricky to work on your own because, as all parts about conducting, except for score study, you need to practice with the real people. You can watch YouTube videos to learn how to swim, but it doesn't guarantee that you can actually swim when you were pushed to the water, right? So it's a little bit, rehearsal techniques especially is a little bit like that. But there are still things that you can work on, and that is tied to your score study and also being really prepared to rehearsals. If you haven't listened to episode number 19, where I talk about how to use your voice well in rehearsals to have more effective and efficient rehearsals, that would be a really good one to start. Even though for that one, I assumed that you know what to talk about or what to correct in rehearsal, I think some of the practice that I shared is still very useful. Most importantly, you want to make sure that what you're saying in rehearsal is very much to the point. You don't want to waste time, stop the ensemble and flipping pages, say, let's do something. Let's say there was something that was wrong. I wasn't quite sure. No, you don't want to do that in front of the ensemble. So in episode earlier this month, in episode number 47, I also talked about how I prep for rehearsals. And at the end of that episode, I gave some tips that I would just say it again. So it's the best to watch your own videos of rehearsing. They are tedious to watch, but it was such a great thing to do. I remember the first time I was forced to sit there for an hour watching my own rehearsal footage. I realized how slow the rhythm I was in. I was wasting time, like maybe joking with my concert master, while the rest of the ensemble didn't know what was going on. Or I made so many mistakes that I talked when they were still playing and I wasn't projecting my voice enough. So where I placed my video was next to the horns and the orchestra couldn't really understand. I sounded like I was mumbling. And I heard my players kept asking, where are we? Where are we starting? Where is that? That was like a real shock to me. But that was really helpful. So watch your own rehearsal videos and don't fast forward anything. Just sit through your own rehearsal once and you will find a lot of things to work on. And the other thing that I say that is tied to your score study is, I think whenever you're studying a score, no matter it's a new piece or in an old piece, it's something you are going to conduct soon or you're just studying for fun or for your own knowledge, you have to have a rehearsal plan toward the end. I use Post-it to indicate sections where it might be problematic because of the way the music is composed. So it could be a section that is rhythmically complicated, that it might need some help counting or line up things. Or it could be a section where the materials are broken into different sections. So the flute plays a little bit, then clarinet has to jump in, then bassoon has to take over. Then it comes to horns, and then it comes to the violins, things like that, that the one might need something to line up. Or it can be a part that is technically challenging. You see, if you're working with a choir when the registration is high, it's really high, kind of hanging there for 5 pages for the sopranos and tenors, you know that will get voice fatigue, or that there are a lot of notes that they need to get through, or there are odd intervals with big leaps that your singers will need some help finding the pitch, or there are just a lot of text that they need to practice rapping it to a degree that they can put the words into the music. So you know it from studying your score. And depending on how soon I'm going to rehearse it, I sometimes just write. If I'm only studying it for fun, I would just write in pencil, say rehearse violins or rehearse this, watch the balance, make sure I can hear the solo part. Or I will use really bright. I have those pink, orange, shining green kind of Post-it to indicate, okay, here are the places that might be problematic. Or those are the places, the transitions that I have to rehearse first so we won't fall apart. And in rehearsal, it's not like I'm only hitting my list, but if things really go wrong according to my list, I'm going to those places first to make sure that we can still connect sections from sections. And some other general things that we just talked about, watch a lot of rehearsal footage. I will put that in the show notes. There is a orchestral rehearsal footage library that someone else compiled with some really famous conductors, their old footages of them rehearsing. Or go to rehearsals if you can play in an ensemble if you're able. So really, really do all the things that was recommended. And I'm going to add one more thing because you might be thinking now, okay, if I have already heard episodes number 19 and 47, why am I listening to you again now? Or why am I bringing this up again? Because I realized that we don't often talk about how to actually learn and focus in rehearsals. From my own experience and from what I talk to my friends, a lot of times we separate the conducting techniques from rehearsal techniques. In my own study, during my master's programs, a lot of times when I was put in front of an ensemble, that was when my teacher was going to teach me. So we didn't talk about how can I rehearse more effectively or how my gesture was provoking a certain kinds of things. Like we only focused on myself. Okay, I need to conduct differently. I need to set the tempo this way. I need to do that. So I didn't really learn how to split my mind, which is a crucial thing, and also split my ears in rehearsal. And what do I mean by that? I mean, in rehearsal, I think we should be focusing on listening to the ensemble, evaluating what's going on, and also monitoring ourselves. Are we doing the right thing for the moment? And this sounds a lot. I guarantee you it's overwhelming. If you're just starting out or if you are just learning to put all these things together, I would say when the music is easy enough that the musicians can play or sing themselves, pay attention to yourself. Have some checklist, no more than 3 things. Say, if you want to be working on your posture, say, monitor if you're leaning forward again, or if you want to check on practice your eye contact, say, are you really connecting to your musicians? Are you looking at the back of the session, or are you only looking at your concertmaster? Am I keeping a tempo with my hands? Am I waiting and slowing them down? Did I give the good cue? Was I clear? When it's easy enough, pay a little more attention to yourself while also listening kind of on the background to see, okay, this is fine. At the places where you had foreseen that could be problematic from your score study, as we talked about, you want to pay more attention to your musicians. For those bars, forget about your conducting problems. Forget if you're standing up straight. Forget if you are always, like in the 4 pattern, you always forgot to go to your right. For your 3, you always come to the middle. Don't worry about those things. Pay more attention to what the musicians are needing and give them that. So it's constantly switching between the 2 states. One is paying a little more attention on yourself and listening to the musicians. And the second one is really, really focusing on them and help them and serve the musicians. Of course, after a while, you will be switching between them a little more easily. And also as you rehearse your musicians, then they know better. So like a session might be so difficult at level 10 out of 10. Now it's a little more manageable after you played for 3 rehearsals. They're not only 5 out of 10. Then you can start monitoring yourself a little bit. Say, oh, they are not together because I wasn't clear on the speed. Or, oh, they can't come in because our timpanis to really need a cue here and I've been missing it. That kind of thing. So I think that's something that's really interesting to really learn how to rehearse while learning conducting. And that's something I am hoping that will be done more often or to be talked more about, because certainly when I was a student, I didn't have that kind of like integrated training. The last thing I'm going to touch on today's episode is starting your own ensemble or find someone you can conduct with. Because as we all know, and as I said at the beginning of today's episode, conducting is a thing that you need to practice to get better. You need to really work with live musicians. Yes, it's different to work with one pianist or two pianists as opposed to working with a full orchestra all the time, but it's still better than nothing. It's much, much better, like 300%, if not more, better than conducting a video or conducting a YouTube link or connecting to some world famous recordings thinking that everything will be okay when it's not. So find or found an ensemble if you're able. Now COVID is less problematic in most of the countries in the world. Musical activities are resuming. You can more easily find friends who are vocalists, instrumentalists, or anyone. You need real people, no matter if they're good or not. Even just practice some rhythmic dictation, have them make a noise whenever you give an indication. So it's da, 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 ba, ba. That kind of rhythmic dictation would really help your conducting techniques. We will be talking a little more about how to start your own ensemble, but that is a key. And everyone does it differently. But if you talk to 10 conductors, probably 8 or more of them will tell you that at some point of their training or career, they founded their own ensemble just to practice. And this is such an important thing. Don't be shy, and you want some constant contact or some constant practice with an ensemble to continue getting better as a conductor. And while you do that, really think what you can bring to the ensemble, because no one wants to play for free for someone else like all the time, right? So when I did that during my master's study, I formed an ensemble and we performed pieces that are audition excerpts for audition orchestras, for professional orchestras. So while they learn those excerpts, I help them by actually having them play the entire piece in ensembles so they have a better chance of winning a job. That's one way of doing it. Another example is so during my study, we have a artistic diploma degree when people had to enroll in chamber ensembles for all semesters. So there are a lot of people needing to be in a chamber ensemble, but not so many people in a group. So I talked to the chamber music coordinator and had convinced him that people playing in my orchestra will also get a chamber music credit. So that was also an incentive of getting good students or good musicians coming in and play. So find something that people are interested in. I know a friend started an ensemble playing different repertoire. Like all the musicians that he recruited were tired of playing the same thing over and over again. So they don't want to play another Mozart or another Tchaikovsky. They founded an ensemble that only plays new pieces to them. So they never repeat a repertoire. So there are different ways to think about it. And as I say, if you can find a purpose, if you have a strong why and a purpose that people can follow you, that's the best. We'll be talking a little more in the next month, where I will be sharing some ideas about like forming your own ensemble and also about leadership. But I hope you enjoyed today's talk. If you probably can tell, I'm not recording in my closet as usually. I am actually in Florida because we have a last minute trip to the beach. So my kids are now at the beach and I'm in the hotel room recording this episode for all of you. So I hope you are having a great summer if you're on the North Sphere. And no matter what, that you're having a good time. And thank you so much for listening. And I will see you next week at the same time, same place. Bye for now.